Somebody reached out to me on Instagram and they asked the question, how do you lose weight without calorie counting and restricting? So I wanted to do a video about that because that's a fantastic question. The first thing that I want to address in that question is I want to unpack it just a little bit. The thing I want to zero in on is the restricting part. Weight loss, at its very core, for weight loss to happen, you have to take in less energy than you expend. So if you're taking in less than what you're putting out, that means by its very nature, some restriction has to happen. So if you don't do anything different, then nothing is going to be different, right? And so I think what she might have meant was, how am I able to lose weight and not deprive myself? That is a great question. I can relate to it. I spent many a year depriving myself, and during those times, I never had long-term success, because if the only way of getting to your ideal body is by depriving yourself, then who wants to do that for the rest of their lives? Nobody. And so yes, with that in mind, let's address the question, how do I lose weight without calorie counting and deprivation? So at its core, weight loss is really about boundaries. And what I mean by that is, when I had a weight loss problem, or a weight problem, we'll say, when I had a weight problem, the way I ate was limitless. And I'm not talking about necessarily I just ate everything inside all the time, but there was no boundaries around how I ate. There was no structure, there was no rhythm to it. And so I ended up with a weight problem. The large majority of my clients, I actually can't think of a client that doesn't on some level have some kind of problem with boundaries, with rhythms, things like that. I want to give you an example of how that shows up, so that if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't quite understand what you mean by it's a boundary problem, I will use myself as an example. When I left home at 18 to go to college, actually through most of college, but especially that first year, I remember I basically ate like Macaulay Culkin did from Home Alone. And I don't know if you remember that fantastic movie, but the first day that he thought he had made his family disappear, for dinner that night, he had a big bowl of ice cream. Just this massive bowl of ice cream. Now, 18-year-old Sarah didn't get to the college dorm and just eat a big bowl of ice cream for dinner, but I do have memories of things like sometimes not going to the cafeteria because maybe I was feeling lonely, or maybe I was busy or whatever, and I would end up eating Pop-Tarts for dinner. I remember multiple lunches going on a kick where at the end of my meal, I would finish off my meal with coffee and ice cream for like every single lunch for months, right? And so that is Sarah, who got out of the house. She broke free from any kind of restrictions, and that's how she started eating. And you wonder where the freshman 15 comes into play, right? But I will say, I was aware of the freshman 15 and was terrified of it, because remember, I went on my first diet when I was 10 years old. So I was very much so like, I am not going to gain the freshman 15. So in 18-year-old Sarah's infinite wisdom, she knew that to gain weight, you have to take in more energy than you burn. So I started making adjustments to how I was eating that allowed me to continue to eat Pop-Tarts for dinner, or ice cream and coffee at the end of all my meals. And so what that ended up looking like is like, oh, well, I could have some tacos and then have the ice cream, but those tacos, that's going to take up room in my stomach. That's going to be extra calories. You know what? And keep in mind, I wasn't actually calorie counting, but that's going to be extra energy. You know what? Instead of that, I'm just going to eat the ice cream for dinner. That's an example. I never got that extreme, but that's the kind of thinking that I started to move into. Now, at this point, you might be saying, Sarah, you're not describing me at all. At no point would I ever eat Pop-Tarts for dinner. That's stupid. And that may be true. You are much wiser than 18-year-old Sarah was, if that's... I guess what I'm trying to say is, whether you're 18, 28, 38, or 48, we all have our Pop-Tart for dinner example, right? So yours might not be Pop-Tarts for dinner. Maybe yours is popcorn and wine for dinner, right? Or cheese and wine for dinner. Or maybe yours is running by McDonald's because it's just faster for dinner. Or maybe yours is, I don't really eat dinner, I just snack throughout the day. Those are all really examples of the same problem, not having any kind of a structure or rhythm, excuse me, not having any kind of a boundary. That's where we end up with this weight problem, right? Because we're just eating however. And in my own life, for me, I know as I began to mature and evolve and read more books about nutrition, I did up-level my version of Pop-Tarts for dinner. But really what it turned into was, for all you musicians out there, I started eating in a more staccato kind of way, I guess you could say, where it's just like, da-da-da-da-da-da, like, it almost became arrhythmic. It was chaotic. I might eat just a little bit for breakfast and then nothing until dinner and then graze all the night away, or maybe starve myself for several days at a time, or restrict myself for several days at a time and then binge one day. You know, so it was just all over the place. And even when I was eating in a more, what I thought, healthier way, I might be eating like cashews, or, oh, it comes from Whole Foods, that means it's nourishing my body, it's healthy. When, is it really, right? Like, if you're just eating plantain chips and they come from Whole Foods, does that really mean you're eating in a healthy way? Well, no. So this is what I'm coming back to about, by and large, if you have a weight problem, chances are you have a boundary problem with your food. There's a whole nother conversation where this can go into boundaries extended beyond food, right? If you have a boundary problem with your food, you probably have a boundary problem with your relationships as well. And the food is just a symptom of that. But that's another video. For now, what's the antidote? Okay, so I have a boundary problem, but I don't want to count calories. Because I will tell you, calories is just one way of creating a boundary. It's a very specific way, right? Like with calorie counting, you can narrow that boundary right down to here. And if you've done calorie counting and it hasn't worked for you, I would say maybe get a coach, because it could be that, you know, if you gave yourself a calorie allotment of 750 calories a day, for example, I can tell you why you didn't succeed. Calorie counting is one way. But the other way, let's say you're eating, you're limitless. So you can eat at any time of day. You can eat whatever it is that you want for how much, you know, however much of it is you want. If you can even just bring boundaries to here, you're going to be doing better than here. And if you're here, if you can just bring those boundaries in just a little bit, you're going to be doing so much better. You're going to find so much more success on your path than if you're just limitless with what you can eat. For this video, and for the sake of streamlining, I'll just tell you what my framework is, how I would approach this generally from the outside looking in. If you're trying to bring your eating boundaries here, what we need to do is elevate your eating habits to the level of ritual. Let me give you an example, a real world example of what this looks like. If you're like, ritual? Okay, what is she talking about now? I have a friend, a dear friend of mine that I love so much. And most people would say that this dear friend of mine has a coffee habit. In fact, she and I, one of the many ways that we have bonded has been over coffee. She drinks coffee every single day. But here's how she elevates her habit to ritual status. Number one, she spends money on a nice brand of coffee. So she doesn't just go to the grocery store and get whatever brand, which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but my friend, she has a specific brand she orders online. She has a specific way that she prepares it. The last time I checked, and she might have changed recently, but the last time I checked, she was using one of those small Italian percolator espresso makers that you use over the stovetop. She used that to brew her coffee. So automatically, you know, she's not doing like the one punch, like, burp, okay, Keurig, boom, out the door. she takes time to prepare her coffee. And then, this is the denouement, the icing on the cake, right? She sits on her porch every morning with her cup of coffee and she watches the sunrise as she sips her coffee. That, my friends, is ritual. That is taking a habit, something like I said, a lot of people will just like, boom, get the Keurig, throw it back, let's go. And they might even be doing that all day long. Like you might be dripping coffee all day long. That is a habit. What my friend is doing is a ritual. She's getting ready to retire, so it could be that she might include that ritual in the afternoon. She might have an afternoon coffee ritual for all I know. But the point is, she puts her attention on it, she's present for it, she shows up for it, and she adds rhythm to it. So if the word ritual is a little bit too weighted, like you're like, all right, Sarah, what are we talking? Are we talking about like seances here? No, we're not. Perhaps rhythm might be a better word for you. But the idea is there's a cadence to it. There's intention behind it. So what? What do I do with this? What I recommend if you're trying to lose weight without calorie tracking, the very first step I would do is I would sit down and I would do what's called getting altitude on how you're eating. So it might be that you sit down and you just think through, okay, this last week, how was I eating? What were all the ways that I was eating? Ask yourself, how can I bring more rhythm, more ritual to my eating world? So that might mean actually, having a plan of some kind. It doesn't have to be super intense, but if you're the person that you grab a snack bar on the way out the door and you're eating while you're driving, or you skip meals altogether, it might be as simple as, maybe I'm just gonna watch the sunrise as I drink my cup of coffee and eat my snack bar. Like it might be that simple. It could also be, what kinds of foods are you eating? Do you tend to bias towards the carb-only dinner, which is something that I would totally do if I haven't learned to bring rhythm and ritual into my life. I just want to give this one kind of last nod to the importance of ritual. At its very core, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they are rituals. They are used around the world. So you might be on the, I eat 6 times a day, I eat 8 times a day, whatever. That's fine. You can still bring ritual and rhythm to that kind of eating cadence. But I would encourage you, all of the traditional cultures have some version of breaking their fast, right? You wake up, you sit together, you break the fast from the night before. Every culture has some version of a lunch, whether it's an early lunch or a late lunch, followed by perhaps a siesta or something, but something that breaks up the rhythm of the day. And then every culture has some kind of an evening meal. It might be earlier in the evening, it might be super late in the evening, but the whole idea is to close the door on one part of your day, open the door on the next. Doesn't that sound wonderful? Doesn't that sound more easeful and enjoyable than just kind of running from one thing to another, eating while you're doing something else? I don't know. It does to me. I find that for a lot of people, if they can just bring some kind of pattern into their life, if you could just do 1 or 2 little things to tweak what your body is expecting, you might find that you lose some weight.